Chapter 27 of Fathers and Sons. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. Translated by Richard Hare. Chapter 27. Bazarov's old parents were all the more overjoyed by their son's sudden arrival on account of its complete unexpectedness. Arina Vlasyevna was so agitated, continually bustling about all over the house, that Vassily Ivanovich said she was like a partridge. The short flat tail of her little jacket certainly gave her a bird-like look. He himself made noises and bit the amber mouthpiece of his pipe, or, clutching his neck with his fingers, turned his head round, as though he were trying to find out if it was properly screwed on, then suddenly opened his wide mouth and laughed noiselessly. "I've come to stay with you for 6 whole weeks, old man," Bazarov said to him. "I want to work, so please don't interrupt me." "You will forget what my face looks like, that's how I will interrupt you," answered Vassily Ivanovich. He kept his promise. After installing his son in his study as before, he almost hid himself away from him, and he restrained his wife from any kind of superfluous demonstration of affection. "Last time Enyushka visited us, little mother, we bored him a little; we must be wiser this time." Arina Vlasyevna agreed with her husband, but she gained nothing thereby, since she saw her son only at meals and was in the end afraid to say a word to him. "Enyushenska," she would sometimes start to say, but before he had time to look round she would nervously finger the tassels of her handbag and murmur, "Never mind, I only ..." And afterwards she would go to Vassily Ivanovich and ask him, her cheeks leaning on her hand, "If only you could find out, darling, what Enyusha would like best for dinner today, beetroot soup or cabbage broth?" "But why didn't you ask him yourself?" "Oh, he'll get tired of me." Bazarov, however, soon ceased to shut himself up. His fever for work abated and was replaced by painful boredom and a vague restlessness. A strange weariness began to show itself in all his movements; even his walk, once so firm, bold and impetuous, was changed. He gave up his solitary rambles and began to seek company. He drank tea in the drawing room, strolled about the kitchen garden with Vassily Ivanovich, smoked a pipe with him in silence and once even inquired after Father Alexei. At first Vassily Ivanovich rejoiced at this change, but his joy was short-lived. "Enyusha is breaking my heart," he plaintively confided to his wife. "It's not that he's dissatisfied or angry, that would be almost nothing. But he's distressed, he's downcast, and that is terrible. He's always silent; if only he would start to scold us. He's growing thin, and he's lost all the color in his face." "Lord have mercy on us," whispered the old woman. "I would hang a charm around his neck, but of course he won't allow it." Vassily Ivanovich tried several times in a very tactful manner to question Bazarov about his work, his health and about Arkady, but Bazarov's replies were reluctant and casual, and once, noticing that his father was trying gradually to lead up to something in the conversation, he remarked in a vexed tone, "Why do you always seem to be following me about on tiptoe? That way is even worse than the old one." "Well, well, I didn't mean anything," hurriedly answered poor Vassily Ivanovich. So his diplomatic hints remained fruitless. One day, talking about the approaching liberation of the serfs, he hoped to arouse his son's sympathy by making some remarks about progress. But Bazarov only answered indifferently, "Yesterday I was walking along the fence and heard our peasant boys, instead of singing an old folk song, bawling some street ditty about 'the time has come for love.' That's what your progress amounts to." Sometimes Bazarov went into the village and in his usual bantering tone got into conversation with some peasant. "Well," he would say to him, "expound your views on life to me, brother. After all, they say the whole strength and future of Russia lies in your hands, that a new era in history will be started by you, that you will give us our real language and our laws." The peasant either answered nothing or pronounced a few words like these: "Oh, we'll try. Also because, you see, in our position—" "You explain to me what your world is," Bazarov interrupted. "And is it the same world which is said to rest on three fishes?" "No, batyushka, it's the land that rests on three fishes," the peasant explained soothingly in a good-natured patriarchal sing-song voice. "And over against our world we know there's the master's will, because you are our fathers. And the stricter the master's rule, the better it is for the peasant." After hearing such a reply one day, Bazarov shrugged his shoulders contemptuously and turned away, while the peasant walked homewards. "What was he talking about?" inquired another peasant, a surly middle-aged man, who from the door of his hut had witnessed at a distance the conversation with Bazarov. "Was it about arrears of taxes?" "Arrears? No fear of that, brother," answered the first peasant, and his voice had lost every trace of the patriarchal sing-song; on the contrary, a note of scornful severity could be detected in it. "He was just chattering about something, felt like exercising his tongue. Of course, he's a gentleman. What can he understand?" "How could he understand?" answered the other peasant, and pushing back their caps and loosening their belts, they both started discussing their affairs and their needs. Alas, Bazarov, shrugging his shoulders contemptuously, he who knew how to talk to the peasants, as he had boasted in his dispute with Pavel Petrovich, the self-confident Bazarov did not for a moment suspect that in their eyes he was all the same a kind of buffoon. However, he found an occupation for himself at last. One day Vassily Ivanovich was bandaging a peasant's injured leg in his presence. But the old man's hands trembled and he could not manage the bandages. His son helped him and from that time regularly took part in his father's practice, though without ceasing to joke both about the remedies he himself advised and about his father, who immediately applied them. But Bazarov's jibes did not upset Vassily Ivanovich in the least; they even comforted him. Holding his greasy dressing-gown with two fingers over his stomach and smoking his pipe, he listened to Bazarov with enjoyment, and the more malicious his sallies, the more good-humoredly did his delighted father chuckle, showing all his discolored black teeth. He even used to repeat these often blunt or pointless witticisms, and, for instance, with no reason at all, went on saying for several days, "Well, that's a far-away business," simply because his son, on hearing that he was going to the early church service, had used that expression. "Thank God he has got over his melancholy," he whispered to his wife. "How he went for me today, it was marvelous." Besides, the idea of having such an assistant filled him with enthusiasm and pride. "Yes, yes," he said to a peasant woman wearing a man's cloak and a horn-shaped hood, as he handed her a bottle of Goulard's extract or a pot of white ointment, "you, my dear, ought to be thanking God every minute that my son is staying with me. You will be treated now by the most up-to-date scientific methods. Do you know what that means? The Emperor of the French, Napoleon, even he has no better doctor." But the peasant woman, who had come to complain that she felt queer all over, though she was unable to explain what she meant by these words, only bowed low and fumbled in her bosom where she had 4 eggs tied up in the corner of a towel. Once Bazarov pulled out a tooth for a traveling peddler of cloth, and although this tooth was quite an ordinary specimen, Vassily Ivanovich preserved it like some rare object and incessantly repeated, as he showed it to Father Alexei,